Hello, Coder Cats and Coder Kittens! As usual, this is Becca going by Netcats Meow most places online, and I am back once again happy to talk to you about Linden scripting language. And just having wrapped up our little mini-series about databases, I have a specific request from B Glams from the Discord server. Remember, the link to the Discord is in the description for anybody that's coming new to this series. And they want to know about the ins and outs of creating a HUD which will control alpha in pretty much all ways. The different categories of alpha, the degree of it, and alpha being basically transparency on a prim or mesh object. Now, most of what's involved in that we've actually covered in previous tutorials, but I know how much of a difference it can make to have everything put together in one place, so that is exactly what we are going to do. But this particular week is going to be discussing the varying states that you can render your alpha in, and how to understand the different ins and outs of how they're going to interact. Because it's not quite as simple a thing as you think, and it affects everything from effective prim count to how things are rendered. And in fact, I keep meaning to put together a test device for this very purpose. I had actually auto-returned part of my own sim once by playing with alpha the wrong way. So we're going to spend some time going over what effects different things will have on everything from how something renders to how it interacts with lighting to how it interacts with your effective prim count. So that when we go in and actually construct a HUD to manipulate these different elements, that all of the necessary foundational understanding will be there. Also, with everything going on, no, I have not tried to figure out what the problem between my cell phone camera and my rendering program or my editing program are for creating the weekly nerd news, but I have also gotten a bit of inspiration for one other additional thing I'm going to add to this channel. Since this main series has turned into more of a discussion of how to create certain things and how to approach using the code in Second Life to do that, I am actually going to go and start creating another series of smaller, more focused videos that will actually give you in-depth information on each command you can put into the system and what to do with it. This was inspired both by thinking about how this video series has changed, as well as seeing one of my videos turn up in Google search and realizing that that may actually be a better way for somebody trying to understand one specific command. So, all of that news and discussion out of the way, let us talk about alpha channels and how they affect things. As so often happens, we are starting with the Mark I cube. Your basic alpha, if you go in, it just adjusts your transparency, which is comparable to just adjusting this little slider right here. Where you start to really get interesting is when you're using it with a texture. So let me go in, managers. I actually keep a whole lot of alpha textures made from different clip art on this. Let me go with one I actually created, because that one I can turn around and give you all legal and legit. This should work well enough. If you're wondering what these are just texture organizers. They're an Eridanis's texture organizer. Hashtag not sponsored, but I find their texture organizer works for my purposes extremely well. Once I found it, I basically never looked back, so I highly recommend them. Now, for those of you who are curious just what this is, This, I literally just copied some Linden scripting code and put it in a word processor and used a what they specified as a Kilrathi font, which is just a sci-fi alien font, in order to make it look like some sort of alien computer code. My camera does not want to comply. So most of our examples are going to be done with this simply because I can turn around and give you a copy of that. Since that was my own upload, it was code I wrote. It was, nothing of concern there. This actually is another one I created. I was simulating the light trail from the Tron bikes when I made that. So I could give you that one too. We're actually going to make a second thing here because I am hoping to show you what we sometimes refer to as an alpha conflict or alpha fighting, or some call it alpha damping. Alright, so far that's playing nice. I may not be able to get it to go right now. It may be that my graphics settings are a bit too high. Oh, there it goes. You see right there how you get it to flash where it's... Because when you're layering multiple levels of alpha texture on top of each other, the system isn't always 100% sure which one goes on top. So with a standard setting for your alpha texture, which is alpha blending, you can get this pop where it's inconsistent. Where sometimes the alien code looks like it's in front of the light trail, sometimes it looks like it's in back. For most things, this is fine. For most things, this is not going to harm you. This is the standard for Second Life and has been for years. Now, if for some reason you need to have something be more precise, then you can go in and choose alpha masking. Now you see right there, it made everything go and you can't see through any of it. Let me raise the cutoff. The cutoff is currently set to 0. Alpha masking will, and it will work differently on these over here, I'll show you in a moment. But you turn that up, now you see through it, but everything's garbled. Keep turning it up, and it gets to be more precise until you start to lose some of it. Basically what this does is an alpha texture, when you're creating it in most graphics editing programs, is a black and white picture with varying grades of gray. That the darker it is, the more transparent it is. And that tells your paint program how to decide what can be seen through and what can't. So this just goes through and makes sure it has how much wiggle room there is for that. And you will find this isn't going to fight with those anymore. I mean, okay, it looks like it is, but that's because they're literally sharing the exact same space. There we go. Now it doesn't matter how much I move this around, that stays perfectly consistent. Because now there is no image under there. It is an absolute. This is visible, this is not. Almost like it's a solid object that's layered on there. And if I do the same thing here, change it to alpha masking, as I raise this number, the cutoff, eventually, there you go, it starts to actually just carve parts of the image away because it's a gradient. So how well this works depends strongly on exactly what your alpha texture is. Now, when you're dealing with single prims, this doesn't hurt you very much. If I go through and let's try chopping this prim up a little, still just fine. But if I were to do this on a mesh or on a sculpted prim, there is a distinct chance that changing this style of alpha masking will raise the land impact of that object. And it might even do that here. Okay, in this case, it's actually reduced it. But the more you play around with things like how you change the alpha channel, you have a chance of affecting this. This is more prominent on sculpted prims, on mesh, and on cases where you've combined the two, especially when you've combined the two. I had a project once where when I switched over to this to allow for a better image of a grate that characters could walk over, it jumped the prim count and returned several other things from my sim. It's possible that in a later patch Linden Labs has fixed that, but I haven't heard anything to that effect. So you still want to be cautious. You still want to test what the results are before you do this with anything in-world. If you have it attached to your avatar, it will only affect the render cost of your avatar, but it won't affect the prims of your sim. Now, the other way alpha affects things is what you're going to see when I change shininess blank. And we'll say and that's right, it's on full bright, so you're not going to see it. You see, because of the alpha setting there, everything only shows on the part that is specifically set to be visible. So you can do a lot of things with this. Like you can put this on top of an object and have what seems to be metallic inlay on it because only those parts will show that way. But if you turn it back to blending, suddenly it affects everything because there's no cutoff telling the object what it is and is not supposed to display. So in this case, it looks more like your texture on a pane of glass. And you can even improve that effect somewhat depending on how you've created your alpha masked texture. The complication here is I don't actually remember how I created this texture originally, but I don't think that I have it separated into I believe that I have the alpha channel defining it only. I have a few other things where I can show that a little bit better, but they won't be one of the ones I'm going to be making available to you. Not because I don't love y'all, I do. But not everything is... Actually, this is the wrong one. But not everything is something that I have all of the rights to. We'll stay... None of those have it. Sorry about that. I went hunting for another texture that I could show examples with, because depending on if you're really trying to go for particular looks, alpha isn't the only thing you need to play with. Regular texture. This is going to be a simple example of playing around with it. This is a texture with alpha layer. You can see the writing golden opportunities it's still transparent, but less so than the surrounding glass texture. The idea is it was supposed to be glass. So shininess institute a blank shiny texture. Actually, let's write this one as I created the specular for. Drop the specular in there. Now, you look at it. It should actually reflect slightly differently. So you see how, if you zoom in there, it pans over it and it stays nice and distinct. Unlike over here, where the light pans over it and your image disappears. This is because you have a special texture, a specular map, that's telling this what reflected image is supposed to look like. So you have the main one. You see the largely transparent main background there with the writing, golden opportunities. And then you have the specular. The golden opportunities is the same, but the background is gray and it's not transparent anymore. What that is telling it is that when it comes to reflection, treat it as light bouncing off of that specular texture. And then you would also want to go through texture. You could choose alpha masking, and there you actually see the base texture in place. If you then turn up, you would wind up with a slightly different effect where it is purely clear, but you only get the specular on the golden opportunities, but that's not what you want there. So you want the blending in order to take advantage of the transparency in the texture. So that is a bit of a primer on how different texturing is going to affect how your alpha interacts. If you don't have a specular texture, you wind up with this effect, where everything just is flat, or if you specifically set alpha masking, the light will only reflect off of the parts you see. If you do use a specular map, you have a lot more control over what this looks like. You can actually create some interesting effects, like a textured glass effect, very easily. I can actually demonstrate that very quickly. I bought this hexagonal texture I'm going to use for demonstration. So I'm not going to be able to give that to you since I actually bought that one. So I only have limited rights to it. So we have a normal map. This controls kind of a sense of bumpiness, and a specular. So now you have this hexagonal pattern with, when the light passes over it, a hint of that metal kind of, what's the words I'm looking for here? Kind of corrosion or scratching, but still on a completely transparent surface. So that's the brief example of how the different settings for alpha are going to interact. So in next week's we'll go through and actually start dealing with how to arrange them, how to actually set them all up. And let me see here if I can find an appropriate sculpt. I know most people use mesh, but not everybody, so I'm going to try to do a mesh here as well and see if we can't show how that will actually affect things. Object. Sculpt. Right there, you see it. The land impact jumped to 2. So if I go back here, took off those, it now drops back to 1. So that's an example of where playing with the different rendering functions will actually alter the effective prim weight of an object. You'll wind up with the same thing dealing with mesh as you will a sculpt. So do keep that in mind, that the more of those options you use, the higher the rendering weight for that specific sculpt or mesh is going to be. Prims actually are more efficient. They deal with those changes without as much of a change in rendering weight. Although they will still have a change, especially if you're dealing with objects that link prim, mesh, sculpt in any combination. So there is your primer on alpha and a little bit on normal and specular. So that will go ahead and conclude this week's. That I wanted to make sure all of that was available and understood before we delved into working on changing those settings via a HUD and all of the things that you can do with that. So that, as said, that's it for this week. So hope to see you back next week. As usual, good day, good luck, happy coding. Meow. Do not forget that these videos are set to air usually Tuesday at noon Eastern Standard Time, and that in the description will be a link to the playlist for all of these videos, as well as one for the Discord channel where most of these tutorial requests are coming from. So hope to see you all there. Hope to see this little community of coder cats and coder kittens growing on us. It's actually been a very wonderfully engaged and supportive community so far, so look forward to seeing it grow. In next week's, I will include 2 of the textures you saw, just to give you something to work with for playing with these, but only the ones that I created myself. I can't share the ones that I've gotten either through different vendors in SL or anything like that, so sorry that I'm going to have to disappoint you a little bit on that front, but if I start handing away other people's work, I get in some serious trouble. So, see you all next week. Meow.